Next, from Chicago, at the annual Illinois Association of School Boards Conference, we attend a panel with State Senators Jason Barickman and Jennifer Bertino-Tarrant and State Representative Will Davis as they discuss the budget struggle to fund education, Medicaid, and other programs, as well as if there's a bipartisan agreement over pension funding solutions. This runs about 50 minutes.
On a personal note, some of you may have saw, I was the guy out by the escalator who was chasing the child around. A few of you noticed that there was a child around and asked me, is he yours? He is. We got up here. This is how the day goes and why some of my colleagues are, I think, a few minutes late to join. Sometimes life just is life. My wife and I came up here. We drove up from Bloomington, arrived within the last hour, realized when we got here that our 5-year-old had no shoes on, and there were none in the car. So she raced down the street to go buy shoes while I, performed my real job, which I'm not very good at, evidently, which is dad, hence the 5-year-old running around outside. So, and then I ran into a few of you in the bathroom because I was doing a Superman routine because the rooms aren't ready yet for those who maybe just arrived, so I was, in and out. Anyway, enough with that, and on to the good stuff, which is Illinois state government. Cheer, applause. Yeah. It is a, there's a number of people in the room for whom I have the privilege of representing in Springfield, and for them, they've probably heard me talk about the state of affairs in Springfield. And I, truth be told, I often describe it as toxic. And that's a very descriptive word which I think, unfortunately, is appropriate for the environment which we're working in today. Toxic in that, look, we're all professionals, both sides of the aisle. We don't have to love every minute of our job when we're in the state capitol. But I can tell you that in the recent history, the state capitol is just not a friendly place. It doesn't have to be friendly. It doesn't have to be the best place in the world to go every day. But the mood has shifted significantly in the state capitol. And that has a detrimental effect, obviously, on the things which we're all watching in the news play out, all the way down to the little things that maybe don't matter to the 13 million people of this state, but matter to some subset of them, and they look at their state government and say, it's just not working here. And that's something for which that environment, and look, I'm a part of it, right? As a state legislator, so I certainly acknowledge that. I don't think it's something that any of us are proud to be a part of, that environment, even though we're all proud of our roles in serving in state government and trying to do our best to represent you. Oftentimes I'm asked by my constituents, what can we do to help, whether it means help Jason Barickman or help our state. And I really think that the most significant thing today is for all of the people of this state to urge of their legislators that we continue to seek common ground with one another, and that we continue to demonstrate to one another that even on matters where we may not have a shared idea on what the solution is, that we still respect one another and hopefully can find other issues for which we'll agree upon, and on those that we don't, we'll try to seek common ground. That message needs to be heard by the 177 of us who serve in the state legislature today. And I hope that all of you take away from this conference, if nothing else, that that is an important message for us to hear and for us to live up to. Now, to some of the specifics, last year, a year in which there was, obvious turmoil. There were a few good things that came out of Springfield, and one of the primary things that came out of Springfield that I think was very positive last year was that we were able to fund our educational system at a record-setting level. And through all the problems that we have in our state, we were able to accomplish something that had not been accomplished in 7 or 8 years. We fully funded the general state aid funding formula for the first time in 7 or 8 years. And that took an incredible leap of faith by the governor and legislators on both sides of the aisle, that through all the noise and the chaos and the frustration on all these other issues, that we're able to come together on that one. And I think that's a very positive thing. Now, I certainly recognize that doesn't mean we've solved all these problems within our districts. I certainly recognize that on our mandated categoricals and other things that you're still hoping that the state fulfills its obligations to your districts. But on the funding formula side alone, us hitting that mark, I think, was one of the few positive things that came out of Springfield. And mind you, that came about at a time. Remember what the debate was last spring. The debate was, are we going to change the funding formula, something that we'll all talk about, I think, later today or tomorrow. But the debate last year was, are we going to change the funding formula? And there was a lot of opinions on how we might do that, including John Cullerton, the President of the Senate, who said any changes that we might enact need to direct more money to the Chicago public school system, which for legislators in all parts of the state became a very hot-button issue, which we then had to address through the legislative process. Again, the end result, I think, was a positive step in a very negative climate. Fast forward to today. We just concluded the first week, which is kind of an oxymoron, I suppose. We concluded the first few days of a 2-week period that is called the fall veto session, the time where the legislature comes together to consider whether we will override legislation that previously passed the House and the Senate, went to the governor for signature, and he vetoed it. So we came back this week. We were in Springfield Tuesday and Wednesday. The Senate President canceled session for us on Thursday. Not sure what the House did. And then we go back for a few days after. We're scheduled to go back for a few days after Thanksgiving. Now, we know as a state what's going on, right? Setting aside the full-year school funding budget that we passed, everything else is in a state of turmoil, and that's probably an understatement. We're at the tail end of a 6-month budget, which is called a stopgap budget. That will expire at the end of the year, and with it will come new fire drills and challenges that we will have to rush to deliver a solution to. That's bad management in any system, that decision by crisis, but that's where we're at. Now, as Republicans, we've been very frustrated through this legislative process. And I certainly don't want to, speak ill of my two counterparts who are here today, Representative Davis, Senator Bertino-Tarrant, two individuals who I've worked with for some time on educational issues primarily, and for whom I have great respect. They do a wonderful job of representing their districts. On some issues, we have a different opinion, again, on the answers. But as Republicans, I think our frustration in the legislative process today is that we're not seeing proposed solutions to the many issues that face our state. And I don't need to go through the laundry list of challenges that face our state. But when I hear Speaker Madigan come forward and say all he wants to talk about is the budget, and all he wants to talk about is a tax increase, what I see or what I hear from that message is an unwillingness by the Speaker and by President Cullerton and those who continue to follow that line of thinking, an unwillingness to tackle the other very significant issues that face our state, whether it be the need for pension reform, whether it be the need for Medicaid reform. And mind you, with a President Trump, whether you supported him or not, with a President Trump will come very different policies that will impact our states, like Medicaid, where I expect the federal government will say to the states, we're not going to give you as much money and demand of you as many things like in your Medicaid program. And for Illinois, who's ratcheted up the number of people who are on Medicaid and the obligations that we all as taxpayers have to pay towards Medicaid, what that means is that we as a state may be faced with a decision on whether we're going to tax ourselves more to continue to provide services to more people, even though the federal government isn't helping out as much, or whether we'll make the difficult choice of saying we can't be the solution to the millions of people who are on that system today, and that maybe we need as a government to do less. These are real challenges. Our pension system, our Medicaid system, workers' compensation reform, an issue which has hit, it really hit all of us around the state, but has hit my own district very hard. I come from Bloomington, Normal. I live in Bloomington. In Normal, we saw in the last year the closure of a Mitsubishi manufacturing plant that resided in Normal, Illinois. 1,200 jobs that today are gone because Mitsubishi said, we're pulling the plug on that plant. Now, I don't think that Mitsubishi pulled the plug because of anything related to Illinois government. The reality is people aren't buying the cars that Mitsubishi was producing. But what I do recognize is that that plant still is closed today, and that when we've had people come through, buyers, manufacturers, people who say, look, I need a facility like that one, which is a very good and recently upgraded facility. What they are saying to us who are interested in filling that facility is, I'm not going to locate my business there. I'm not going to buy or lease that plant because I would be making a poor business decision to do business in your state. And it's not because they're contemplating doing business in China or India or elsewhere. They're contemplating doing business in South Carolina, in Atlanta, or in Georgia, in Texas, and in other states throughout our country. And we're losing out on that. And that means to me that we need to do something different in our state. And we cannot simply say, we'll deal with all these issues later, because these issues need to be dealt with today. I think for us to be able to fund adequately our educational system and to do the things that our state should do, we need to have a growing and vibrant economy. And when Speaker Madigan and President Cullerton continue to say they don't want to deal with these other issues that Republicans are asking to deal with, what I wonder is, are they recognizing what's happening in our state, or are they just burying their head in the sand and saying, I hope it gets better, notwithstanding my unwillingness to do anything about it? And so I think you will continue, unfortunately, you're going to continue to see this struggle play out in Springfield until some reasonableness prevails. And on the reasonableness, I hope Speaker Madigan comes to the table and says, I'm willing to negotiate and compromise with you. I hope the Speaker comes to the table and says, I recognize that our economy is not doing and performing as well as it could, and so I'll work with you on your workers' comp reform. I'll work with you on your Medicaid reforms. I'll work with you to see our economic conditions improve so that we can grow our economy. And absent that, I think Republicans are going to continue to hold the Speaker's feet to the fire and try to see our state prevail on some of these issues that I think will help us improve our climate so that the next generation of Illinoisans have a place where they can, once they're through with their education, have a place to work and raise their family as well. And so with that, I'll turn it over to my colleagues, and I look forward to any questions when we're through. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Next, we're going to hear from State Senator Jennifer Bertino-Tarrant, a Democrat from the 49th Senate District. Senator Bertino-Tarrant has served in the Senate since 2013 and is on the Senate Education Committee. Prior to her election, Senator Bertino-Tarrant served as the Regional Superintendent of Will County and Secretary of the Will County Regional Board of School Trustees. So please join me in welcoming Senator Bertino-Tarrant.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's noticeably less crowded in here. Since I've started this room used to be packed, and now it's getting less and less. So one of two things: there's so many good programs on, and they didn't know what to choose, or they have great contact with their legislators as they don't need to be here, or they're just tired of no answers. And I'm guessing that's really what is the reality. As my friend here said, I am an educator by trade. I was a teacher, a school principal. I last served as the Will County Regional Superintendent. And so when I won the seat, it was a natural place for me to belong on the Education Committee. And I find it fascinating because from your perspective, again, a lot of these things we listen to, it would come back to us, and we'd have to try to finagle and figure out what we have to do in order to make it work. And on this end, sitting in the chair to help make these decisions, it's interesting to get the perspective from across the state. And that was something I never had, obviously. I'm born and raised in Will County, been a part of the suburban school system my whole life. So I've had an eye-opener. And I think it became more realistic when we started talking about education funding. And I know we're going to have panels, so I will not dwell on that too much. I know Jason's had a big voice in education funding. But it is something we obviously really need to address. And depending on where you are in the state, you either love the proposals or you hate the proposals. But I think there's been a lot of work in negotiating to have the best of both worlds. And I see Dr. Clark back there talking about the evidence-based model, talking about Senate Bill 231, which is Senator Menard's bill, and being able to come to a conclusion that we can all live with and be happy with. We know we need to make sure our funding is equitable, and I know we need to make sure it's adequate. And part of the problem is defining what really is adequate funding. And again, depending on who you talk to, you're going to have different versions of that. So getting everyone to agree can be a difficult task, but I'm confident that we will be able to come up with something. I don't think that conversation is going away, and it is going to be part of the big picture when we talk about budget. Since I have been there, we have increased dollars that have gone to education, and that's a good thing. Last year, again, we put unprecedented amount into our education system because we know we expect the school districts to do things, and we need to be able to fund those. We have funded it for the full year, and those are all positive things that our schools are seeing. And I was at a senior center earlier this morning speaking to a group who was talking about the community reinvestment program as opposed to the community care program. For those of you who aren't familiar with that, that is for non-Medicaid seniors who are in need of services so they can stay in their home. And again, these are cuts that are being made that we may not realize outside our education world, but people are being hurt by these decisions that are being made. And yes, we are at the top. We are having some philosophical differences. One of the questions that I found was a very profound question. They said, Jennifer, how can we get our leaders to morally understand by not working together, they're hurting us? And it's a great question, and I can't pretend to go into the minds of any of the leaders, whether it's Leader Radonio, Minority Leader Radonio or Durkin, whether it's President Cullerton, whether it's the governor, or whether it's Mike Madigan. I will, and I said this too, I don't think any of them are morally evil. They're not trying to be mean about things. I believe that they just have completely different ideas or ideology of what we need to do as a state. I am a Democrat. I am considered a moderate Democrat in my neck of the woods. People would like to see me be a little more liberal, but I will tell you this: government to me is not a business. It was not designed to make money. It was not designed to have a profit. Government was designed to provide a service. And over the years, prior to years we have been here, when we always call it the good years, when they were taken away, when they were holding off on those pension payments and they were able to delve out things, they opened a lot of programs. They started a lot of programs that now we are seeing are struggling. And so we have to look at prioritizing. But it's hard for me as a person who has, who has watched their parents pass away in their home because they were able to do that, but need these services. It's heartbreaking when you sit amongst people who you are telling them that their $17,500 a year is too much money, and the governor says it's too much money, and we're going to take away some of these programs. It's hard to deal with. And so, again, these are philosophical differences. Do we need businesses in here to create revenue? Absolutely. We absolutely do. But again, we have this image that people are running away. These businesses are not coming here. And that's not always true. We need to look at things. We talk about workman's comp. I'm more than happy to look at workman's comp, but we forget the fact that in 2011 we did it. They did some reform, and the dollars are not being, the savings are not being given to the employer. So where do we have to look to that? Obviously, we have to look at insurance companies, and no one wants to say it. No one likes to talk about the big insurance company, but we don't regulate that. We have when I ask questions to the Department of Insurance, they don't have to answer them because it's between the insurance companies and the Department of Insurance, and that's hard for me as a legislator who is trying to answer questions to my constituents. The budget is going to be at our forefront. It really is this next year. We need to come up with something for the next 6 months, which is coming quickly to December 31st, and then we have to continue to move forward. Senator Barickman said that the Speaker Madigan has said that he does not want to talk about these non-budgetary items. We need to focus on budget items. And I'm going to have to say I agree with that. Whether or not we get term limits, whether or not we today solve workman's comp, whether or not we look at collective bargaining, prevailing wage immediately, or even redistricting, those aren't going to fix the problem now. I think everyone is willing to talk to things, but again, when you do things in desperation, it's not going to work out best for the middle-class families in this area. Last week we were in Springfield, and I'm going to agree with, again, my colleague here, Senator Barickman. It is a divisive. It's divisive under the dome. We have come off of a very expensive campaign season that personally I was involved in. It makes me sick to my stomach how much money was spent on it, and it's flooded back into Springfield, and where I can honestly say I think we like each other there. The people like each other. We're really disliking our politics and people not willing to see a bigger picture. And depending on what side of the aisle you are, with that bigger picture is very different. Education-wise, still, just because we do want to, that's why we are all here. I know with ISB we're going to be, and I talked to Susan, we're going to be talking about licensure. We know we're having a substitute teacher problem. We need to address that. Pensions is always going to be on the top of the ticket, what's going to happen. I know there's many teachers who are scared, not understanding what's going to change. There's always talk about getting rid of PE, getting rid of driver's education, and what's going to happen with the Department of Education. What are we going to look at in regards to federal regulations, if we're going to have a Department of Education, if we're not. And I have talked to many members about revisiting the requirements in para. So those are some things we'll probably see in the Education Committee. Whether or not they go anywhere, it's, you can't ever predict Springfield. That's the one thing I have learned. So I will be happy to answer any questions once we are through here. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Senator. So finally, and last but certainly not least, and we're so grateful that he was able to be here with us today, we have State Representative Will Davis. He's a Democrat from the 30th House District. Representative Davis has served in the House since 2003 and is the chairman of the House Education, Elementary and Secondary Education Appropriations Committee. So please join me in welcoming Representative Davis.
Good afternoon, everyone. Oh my, has it been that kind of day already? Oh boy, not going to make our job any easier then, is it? Again, I'm pleased to be here today. I'm Will Davis. I represent the 30th District. For those of you who don't know, is in the South Suburbs. That's where I was born and raised, and now have the pleasure of serving as the representative there, and have been so for a few terms. As I came in, I was a little late trying to navigate the public transportation and what have you, but I am happy to be here. But when I came in, I heard Senator Barickman talking about how how Republicans are frustrated, and he shared some of those thoughts. And so I sat down and I immediately wrote something, and it says, "Democrats are frustrated too." So that frustration may manifest itself in a couple of different ways, depending on which side of the aisle you're on. But there is some general synergy amongst how I'm frustrated with the way things have gone, very similar to the way both of my senators have expressed their frustration with the way things are going on. Now, I am a Democrat, and I am probably, I'll probably say this, I'm probably the most liberal member up here. And that doesn't mean that I'm necessarily on the opposite side of everything that the senator is, as he's a Republican, but it just means I have some different views. I mean, if you think about the district that I represent, and if anyone is familiar with the South Suburbs, you recognize that we are a region that when other regions grow, ours does not. When other regions prosper, ours sees kind of the other effect. Now, the senator may argue, well, that's why we need to work on things like workers' comp reform and things of that nature. And I'm not opposed to working on any of those things, but I would just tend to think that as members and that we're, are smart and educated, whatever that is that we can work on all of these things at the same time. So in the same manner that the senator would say that he's heard Madigan say that I don't want to talk about any of those other things other than the budget, what I've heard the governor say is that all of those other things, if I don't get those, I'm going to hold up the budget. And that's kind of the situation that we're in. So it just depends on how you look at the situation. Sometimes when I have the opportunity to talk to groups and we're trying to navigate, your views or different views, what have you, one of the things that I have to go back to is back when Governor Rauner came in the office and he put forward his first introduced budget. One of the things that stands out to me more than anything in that is that in his introduced budget, he wanted to cut higher education by 30%. You all are educators, school board members, what have you. Can anybody operate their districts if they lost 30% of their money right away? No. So again, and I only say that because I just want to put some context to the entire conversation. So we had a governor that walked in and said, here's some things that I want to do. Here's some reforms that I want to make. But oh, by the way, I think we're spending way too much money and I want to immediately cut those things. We admitted that. I think the senator said that in 2011 there was a workers' comp bill or reform passed. 4 or 5 years later, we're just seeing the benefit of what that workers' comp reform was. So if we walked into immediately cutting things, saying that we're going to fix workers' comp, knowing that it's going to be about 3, 4, maybe even 5 years before those reforms come, we're stuck in a very tight situation until we see what happens. And what if what we propose doesn't happen? What kind of predicament have we put ourselves in? So that's why I have a tendency to believe that, yes, if the governor wants to work on substantive issues like workers' comp, pension reform, he and I will differ about term limits. for obvious reasons, and I'm not scared to admit that. But there are some things that I think we can work on. But if he says I want to work on those things, I just have a tendency to think that yes, we can work on those items, and at the same time we can figure out how to craft a balanced budget that will make sure that we do everything that we'd like to do as a state, including not things like cut higher ed by 30%. Again, if your students that you are educating in the K through 12 system came out and we cut our higher education system by 30%, there'll be fewer institutions for them to go to. There'll be less options in Illinois in terms of higher ed for them to go to. And in one of my past lives, I served as an admissions counselor for Southern Illinois University at Carbondale. So higher education is very important to me, which is why I also sit on that appropriations committee as well. So I can see the entire continuum of educating from the beginning, at least until they get out of college. So those kind of things are extremely important to me. So I only simply say that when we are talking about these issues, that we look at it in a broad context. I'm going to respect what the governor wants, what his Republican members of the House and Senate would like to see happen as well, but there also has to be the same respect for what I would like to see happen as well. And there really shouldn't be a my way or the highway approach to this. We should be able to work together. We should be able to continue to work and meet and work on the issues, whether it's budget, whether it's revenue. And again, many of my Republican colleagues, even if they won't admit it publicly, will say privately that we cannot cut our way out of this situation. We do need to talk about revenue, and it's important that we do so. If you take a step back and even look at the education bills that we're talking about now, whether it's Senate Bill 231, House Bill 3190 is another one that came out of the Senate, and one that I filed in the House is House Bill 828, which is the pure evidence-based model of funding. All of those need additional revenue. So we can't devoid ourselves from the conversation about substantive issues without addressing on the revenue side what we need to do there as well as the need for services. There will be some challenges that will present themselves because of the new federal administration. If they take a more conservative approach, which many of us think they will, there will be less dollars coming out of D.C. to help us do what we need to here in the state of Illinois. And what does that mean? Do we just simply, if the dollars aren't there, do we just simply cut everything? Or should we all engage in a conversation about adding additional revenue so that we don't lose everything that we've worked hard to get to this point in terms of providing or the services that we've been rendering as a state? I agree. Our job is government. And again, when I hear the governor talk about term limits, one of the things that challenges me is that I have a degree in political science and a master's degree in public administration. So does that mean he's telling me that my degrees aren't worth me staying in government in order to use the education that I receive? Well, of course, I would beg to differ about that. But essentially, what I'm suggesting is that here is an opportunity for us to do some great work together. We are going to be challenged. We already have challenges, and we anticipate several more challenges moving forward as the new administration in Washington, D.C. takes effect. So we're going to have to figure out where we can work together and where we're going to be able to compromise. And obviously, right now, we're not in a position to be able to do any of that. So again, let's just acknowledge the elephant in the room. We are in a very fractured state right now as a government here in the state of Illinois. But I just believe that we've got great people on both sides of the aisle, and while you do everything you can to represent your own particular interests from your district, there are ways in which I can think about the needs of Senator Barickman in Bloomington, and then I can think about the needs of Senator JBT, I'll just shorten it like everybody else does, in Will County. And I'm in South Cook, so I'm not far from that. So I just like to think that we can come together and think about some of the things that we do. Does that mean we're going to be able to agree on everything? Absolutely not. But we know that there are some real priority items that we must agree on if we are going to move forward here in the state. Veto session, while the first week was very lackluster, the House did cancel on Thursday as well. Much to my surprise, I thought we'd actually stay and maybe consider some dialogue. But even outside of not being in Springfield, the governor has in the past put together some working group conversations. I was a part of the budget working group as an appropriations chair, and my colleagues were, based on their expertise or whatever committees they're on, were in a number of those other budget working groups. Back in July, I think it was, I called a guy named Director Newting, who's the governor's director of the Office of Management and Budget. He was the one that was convening us in the budget conversations all through through session and into the summer. And I said, or before we adjourned, and I just simply said, why are we not meeting? We should still be talking about the budget. Just because we walked into an election cycle, regardless of how contentious and bad it was going to be, there's no reason why we should not still be talking. And I asked him to relay that message to the governor, that at least one Democrat said that we need to still be talking about the budgetary items. Unfortunately, because that was, our group was one that the governor called together, the governor chose not to call us back together, at least not up until this point. Presumably, he will do so at the beginning of the year, and we look forward to engaging in those conversations again about the budget. And they were very positive, very fruitful conversations, I would have to say. But we got to a point where now the decisions have to be made upstairs. And none of the leaders, none of the 5 leaders were able to figure out exactly how we wanted to do things. Senator talked about, at the very least, we got some movement on education funding. So we were able to put some dollars forward in terms of education funding. The challenge that I have with that, and while I'm supporting as much money going into K through 12 as we can possibly get, we also put more money in the correction system as well. So what are we trying to tell ourselves by increasing both of those? That yes, we want to educate our children better, but also we need to prepare for more people coming into the correction system. Seems a little odd that we do so. So again, I just simply ask that when you're thinking about these things, regardless of which side of the aisle you support or are on, if you will, try to think about everything in context. That's what I try to do, and I think that helps me to get at least a more balanced approach and at least more balanced thought process relative to some of the things that we are attempting to discuss. So that being said, thank you very much for allowing me to be here with you today, and I too look forward to your questions.
Yeah, Terry Waldron. I'm from Sparta. We're way down south, Randolph County. I actually have 2 questions. One is about the concept of adequate funding, which was a term that you used, and it's kind of bothersome because to me, adequate funding means an adequate education, which means everybody should be happy with C students. So I don't know I'm not sure, can you explain more what you mean by that? Is this like the bottom line funding?
Yes. And that's what I was saying. Adequate funding, it can be defined very different depending on where you're at in personal beliefs. For some, adequate funding is not good enough unless everyone has a laptop. Every student has a laptop, in their hand, and they're able to take it home and back. For other school districts, adequate funding is a computer lab and somewhere for kids to go. I mean, that was my point exactly. We talk, adequate funding is hard to define. Right now, the state says adequate funding means about $6,100 a student. Some people will say that's great. Some other will not. Especially when we're seeing ranges from $31,000 being spent to $6,000, less than $6,000. It's going to be hard to define what adequate funding is, depending on where in the state you're at and who you're talking to.
Okay. Part 2 is for Mr. Barickman about the pension reform. I mean, we've already gone through the Supreme Court and what was considered that, so what are we still talking about?
Sure. And actually, I'll touch on the first question too real briefly, but on the adequacy piece, for those of us who've really advocated on behalf of the evidence-based model, I think we would say we believe that an adequate funding level is an amount of funds that enables every student in every school district to obtain a high-quality education that allows them to compete in the global economy that we think they need to be prepared for. Now, we can back into that. What does that mean? Graduation rates, class size, technology, et cetera, and back into that, the dollars that it takes to provide that. But I think for the evidence-based model, that's our starting point. And we've worked for quite some time on that, and I think we've made meaningful progress on that. On the pension reform question, I think you're right. The courts have ruled that the pension provision of the Illinois Constitution severely restricts the ability of the legislature to change in a substantive way those pension benefits. But that doesn't mean there aren't things that we can do that I think would survive constitutional muster. For example, we can extend the the ramp. I think we can look at blanking on my words, but we look at our rate of returns, and we can smooth those rates over a period of years, so that, like this year, when the pension boards decided that the assumed rate of return should be lowered by, I think they said, 0.5 percentage point, we can smooth that over a few years so you don't have the immediate detrimental effect like you had this year. Our pension obligations last year to this year are going to rise by as much as $1 billion in our this year cost, and that's $1 billion we obviously don't have. So I think there are still some tools out there. I think it's interesting to note that even, this shows you when I say it's toxic, this shows you how toxic it is. President Cullerton came out with a pension reform proposal a year or two ago, maybe 2 or 3 ago. And today, Governor Rauner has said, I'll support that pension reform proposal, call it for a vote, and Cullerton won't even call his own bill for a vote. So, that's the environment that, unfortunately, we're working in today. But I do think there is more we can do with pension reform.
Sir.
Yeah, thanks. Paul Slocum from Southern Illinois, Signal Hill School District, on the board there. On the pension issue, is there general bipartisan agreement, irrespective of whether you support the particular solutions, of a list of substantive solutions that will actually work and fix or substantially address the pension problem? Not whether you guys support it or not, but whether it'll work or not. And then, pushing you more, the Republican, tell me what the best Democratic proposal is that will work, and the Democrats tell me what the best Republican proposal is that will work. Thanks.
Do you want to go?
So I guess it all depends on what organization you support, if for lack of a better way of putting it. So there's a group, a nonpartisan tax policy think tank based here in Chicago called the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability. They put forward some pension reform items that I support. One of the things that we wanted to be able to do was address the ramp issue. To try to figure out how to, over time, decrease our payments and free up more cash that we can put toward education or human services, whatever the case may be. In other words, restructure. Let's restructure the debt, more or less. Now, again, I can tell you that on the Senate side, their colleague on the Democratic side is a young lady named Senator Tory Hutchinson, who chairs Revenue. She has been advocating for restructuring the debt, and have been told by not necessarily the folks sitting here, but other Republicans, we don't want to do that. We're no, can't do that. When we were having our budgetary conversations and we were talking about ways to address some of our revenue challenges, I brought up about restructuring the debt and was told we're not going to do that. So again, it all depends on who you want to listen to in terms of the broader conversation. So for me, it's essentially a proposal is I think that's where we can get the most immediate bang. Now what that requires is a little more cash on the front end, and then over time you see the payments go down where we can then begin to free up more cash to do some of the other things that we want to do. So that's something that I'd be willing to support, but some of my Republican colleagues don't like that idea. So they may have an idea that I don't like. I mean, it's hard to get to somewhere when...
But is there consensus on certain things that will work? We don't like them. Some people don't like them, but which ones will work?
Well, again, I think addressing the pension ramp works. I think that works, but you ask some other folks, they may not think it works. I don't think we know all of the different...
Well, what's one
I don't think we know all of them.
the Republicans have come forward that you don't like? Or not you, but the Democrats don't like?
I'm not sure about what the Republican proposals are, so maybe...
I'll connect.
And I was going to say that I don't know if we have heard an alternative in regards to an other side of the aisle proposal in regards to the pension. As we know, like we said, we've already stated, that the Constitution has been very clear. When I first came into office, we voted on a bill that was negotiated, 2404. It was supported by the We Are One Coalition, which was all the unions who were saying we are willing to make these sacrifices, we are willing to give up this. Because we understand that we have to make some cuts, we need to save our pension system. Well, unfortunately, for many people talking about pension reform, they didn't vote for it because it wasn't enough money. They said it was in the high millions, but it wasn't enough. Well, we have nothing now, and now we have a court ruling that says it's a pretty ironclad wording in there. So who knows if they'll even come back to the table. We're hoping that they do. We talk about President Cullerton's bill. It wasn't exactly 24/4, but he has this belief that will be constitutional, that people in the system can take, they make a choice between whether having a simple COLA or a compound COLA. If you choose a simple COLA, it'll be, you will get your future raises. If you go with the compound COLA, you will freeze once the bill is passed. It has not been called, no, because again, it's something that they're looking to do at a larger budget proposal. And again, there's always an assumption that everyone is going to vote on this. Because we're all Democrats, we're all going to vote on this, or we're all, they're all Republicans, and they're not going to vote on it, or something. It's not always true. It's not. There's different levels, especially Democrats. We talk about liberal and moderate. We have to, listen to our districts. So again, it's not always a for sure thing that if a good idea comes out, that everyone in that party is going to support it. But it does. It has to be looked at. I don't know where the gentleman. That's one of the things we do have to address pension reform, because that is a huge part of our budget.
Sure. So I have long believed that if you truly want to reform the pension system, you're going to move our employees to a 401k style, a defined contribution style system. That's a very controversial proposal, but it is a proposal that has been supported by a number of people, including myself. I think if we truly want to enact pension reform, that type of model is what we need to look at. I also recognize that my colleagues, primarily on the other side of the table, but not exclusively, a majority of them do not support that. We have looked at other measures which can provide meaningful reforms. I suggested before the ramp, which Representative Davis suggested, and oh, by the way, I leaned into him earlier and I said, when's the last time you saw Rauner and Madigan hug? Maybe that could help. Maybe. Yeah, I mean, we teach our kids these things. I think we look at the ramp. I think we look at smoothing techniques. I think we look at capping the salaries that are pension eligible. There's a lot of tools out there. And I want to just quickly plug a concept that maybe you've heard about or read about, which is these working groups. Representative Davis suggested some of this. But the working groups sat down without cameras in public, and Republicans and Democrats sat in the room. And we pulled out a piece of paper. We said, okay, what's all of our issues? Pension reform, workers' comp, taxes, revenues, whatever we want to call them. And we had a very frank discussion on all of them. I think what we found is that when you turn off the cameras, there is a sincere desire by a lot of people, both sides, to find that common ground. You had Republicans in the room saying, well, look, if we can put together something like this, here's the types of tax rates that maybe could be sold to other Republican members of our caucus. You had Democrats in the room saying, well, if that's if this issue over here that we care about is on the table, we might be able to find movement over here on inserting primary causation within the workers' compensation statute. Those groups got to a point where they said, we've done all that we can, and our piece of paper is now going to the leaders, governor, the 4 legislative leaders. And I think what we need today is for those leaders to put themselves in a room and say, okay, the rank and file did what they could. They gave us their list. They gave us their suggestions. And it's time now that we cut a deal. I think that could happen any day. Do I think it's going to happen any day? You know, unfortunately, I don't see it. But it could. And it would happen if Governor Rauner and Speaker Madigan and the others walked in the room with a sincere desire to cut the deal. When they do that, they're going to come out, they're going to say, we got a deal, we're all going to go and take votes. Some votes we'll like, some we won't, and then we're going to move on. And until that, you all are frustrated just like us.